Time now for The Geek Show. Joining us in Mohawk Studios, Wellington City, it is Ms. B this morning. Good morning, Ms. B.
Good morning, Wamo.
Today we're talking about infographics, and for one thing that I think most people love is information in a graphic and presented out on a plate in such a delightful, wonderful way. Infographics, we love them all, right?
Definitely. I mean, that's one of the things we do at Mohawk Media is we make animated infographics, and sometimes we make print media ones as well. And I've been teaching the Identity in the Internet module at Victoria University's School of Architecture and Design this term. So one of the things I've been telling the students to look at as ways of presenting their information as a CV is considering using infographics, because there's some really great portfolio websites out there now where designers are presenting their skills but in a graphical format.
Cool.
And I think it works really, really well.
Well, I guess, yeah. I mean, if you're in that line of work and you can't present your own kind of abilities in that sort of format, then there's something wrong.
That's right. So I found an article at The Guardian which talks about designing an infographic CV, which was quite interesting. It was a journalist who was looking for work experience and found that it worked really, really well. So there's some quite good tips in there. But that's obviously if you are a designer and you know how to use design software. So something I came across this week, looking at a careers website called Brazen Careerist, is a site called Visualize Me, with 2 Zs. Now, Visualize Me connects to your LinkedIn profile, and what it does is it takes your professional profile and it converts it into an infographic for you. So for those of you watching the webcast, you can see right now on screen my Visualize Me CV. And I really like it. It's a very different way of looking at your skills and looking at your interests. So my interests are innovation, creativity, enterprise, and collaboration, which is about right.
Yeah.
And it shows the award that I won when I was working for Knowledge Board and some quotes that people have made. But I really like the timeline, the career timeline of looking to see what your CV is, but in a graphical format.
This is
and you notice things.
Yeah, well, this is quite key, isn't it? As we all become more and more digital citizens, there's more and more stuff out on the web about us, right? And some of it, I guess, for newer generations who perhaps put stuff on the web in their younger years that they probably weren't happy about, but are still up on the web. Isn't this important to be able to curate your own information, present yourself how you want to be presented, say, in front of a potential employer?
Yeah, I completely agree. And this concept of timelines and infographical ways of showing your history, I think it's going to become more and more commonplace. I mean, look at the Facebook timeline, which is one way of showing your progression through the world, through images and connections. But yeah, with all of these APIs on all of these different services, such as LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, I think you'll get to see lots more graphical representations of your activity in an online space.
Okay, all right, what else?
Well, there were some fun infographics as well that came out of the Mix and Mash competition, and a few of them which didn't necessarily win, but they caught my eye, which I thought were quite interesting, of ways of showing New Zealand in a different format. So, for example, there's one called A Time to Live by Courtney Stewart, and she's basically looked at different ways that New Zealanders are spending time between 1998 and 2010. And I think this is quite fascinating. So there's a Flickr infographic up which shows you what the output is. So, for example, looking at this now, we now spend much less time cleaning our houses. We spend 10 minutes extra time sleeping per night. We spend 57. So other mass media and free time activities have gone up. Apparently, we're spending 66% less time thinking per day.
Yeah.
How have we worked that one out? I'm not quite sure. But it's quite interesting just to see the changing in the way that we are spending our time day to day. Now, one of the infographic judges was a guy called Nathan Yao, who has a site called Flowing Data. So that's another really nice one to look, flowingdata.com. And I had a little look down this yesterday, so there's a whole load of these, but one of them I particularly liked, which I think is, again, it's an interesting perspective, and that's what I love about infographics, is they tease out information from data sets, which could be flat, and you wouldn't necessarily make the interconnections. And it's an overlay, a mashup of areas in the world where people don't use Facebook, overlaid with that map, that famous NASA map of the world of the Earth at night time.
Right, with all the lights.
Yeah, that's right. So it looks really interesting, and where you can see the dark spots on the map are where people are not using Facebook. And it's important, I think, just to remember that there are big chunks of the world that aren't online, that aren't connected to this social media grid. So yeah, that was quite interesting. There was another infographic from Mix and Mash by Natalie Morell, which is Where Does Our Money Go?, which is a breakdown of a weekly spend in 2010. And that's quite interesting, just looking at the proportion.
Where does our money
exactly.
go?
Where does all our money go? Absolutely. So, it was the breakdown of a weekly spend in 2010 broken down by different types, different areas, such as how much we spend on water, food, cars, holidays, household products. And I thought what was interesting, in the regional spending, you would, focusing on the three largest regional areas, the capital makes up 24% of weekly expenditure, which is slightly more than Auckland, which I thought was quite interesting.
What are they spending it on? Suits, no doubt. Suits.
Beer. And the other one that I thought was really interesting, this was an infographic by Keith Ning, who won the infographic category for one of his other entries. Now, this is quite a fun one. And again, if you're on the webcast, you can have a look at this on screen. It's called the Supermodern Thomsotron. And it's an homage to Alistair Thompson, formerly of the Employers and Manufacturers Association.
Yeah.
And what he's done is he's broken down by types of group, whether people are employed and full-time or whether they are not in the labour force or they're a child living with parents. He's basically broken down the proportion of time that men and women spend on different types of tasks, such as household work, purchasing goods and services, labour force activity. And that's really interesting because you can see the real statistics coming through. Like, for example, mass media and free time activities, men spend 2 minutes 34 and women 2 minutes 23. So it's, just really interesting. And this is one of these dynamic infographics that you can play with that is pulling information from open data sets. And that's the really good thing as well about the fact more and more infographics are available to be made now because of the fact that a lot of these data sets are now being open and Creative Commons.
I reckon they should introduce this into the school syllabus, creating and making infographics and making sense of information.
Absolutely agree with you. I think it is really important. It's part of your critical thinking skill set, really, is to be able to... I mean, journalists get taught this, but I agree with you. There's a lot of stuff that gets taught at schools, that should be taught at schools, that would be incredibly useful for a modern world. So just a few other sites that I like. One is called Visually, visual.ly, and there are loads of infographics on this site, absolutely masses of them. If you scroll down the front page, there's a whole load of fun ones, one of which I particularly like, which is the evolution of the geek. Talking through where the term originally comes from, the wildest person in the circus, right the way through computer geeks, internet geeks, academic geeks, and the fact that, you can be a geek even if you're not a nethead. You can be a book geek, a pop culture geek, a politics geek.
Is that true? The original geek was the wildest person at the circus.
They were the crazy performers in the circus. Yeah, I think it comes from a German term, Geck, or Gecken, in the 1500s, where it was meant someone who was considered a fool, but it then went into the 18th century in Austria and Hungary, referring to circus performers whose acts included biting the head off a live chicken. So one might say that Ozzy Osbourne falls into this territory.
He's
perhaps.
definitely a geek.
He could be one of the true modern geeks if you look at the origination of the term. But yeah, a couple of other good sites. There's a link I'll put in the show notes, which is at makeuseof.com, which is some tips on designing an infographic. So the tips generally are: keep it simple, don't try and do too much, stick to a colour scheme, research some great facts and statistics, think of it as a visual essay to ensure your arguments hold and are relevant. Remember, it's all about quickly conveying the meaning behind complex data, draw conclusions, reference your facts, and put your URL in so people can find you afterwards. And the final one to mention, and this is kind of a notable mention just because the tool is so awesome, is an infographic tool called Gapminder, which was created by a guy called Hans Rosling, who talked at TED Talks a few years ago and used Gapminder in his talk, and it completely blew people away because it's an animated representation of data that you can play with across a timeline, and that timeline allows you to really explore the data. So he's looked at information from the World Health Organization, from the growth of economies in the developing world, all sorts of really interesting information. And Gapminder is now part of the Google tools and Google Docs and Google Spreadsheets specifically. So again, if anyone wants to go and have a quick play, have a look around for some good infographic tools, have a good look at it visually, and if you use Google Spreadsheets, then maybe have a play with Gapminder and see what awesomeness you can make.
Indeed, and have a very good look over at The Geek Show as well, thegeekshow.com, 2 3s rather than 2 E's, where you'll find this as a video once more. And Ms. Behaviour over on Twitter as well, continue the conversation there. Thanks, Ms. B.
Cheers, Wemo.